It's so lovely to see you, like in a big way. And we've been waiting for a conversation for like, I don't know how long. But I'll tell you right now, what's really nice is that I'm looking in your room and I can actually see some of the stuff in your room. And I really like that because so many people, when you have conversations with them, they'll do the blurry background. And I find
Yes.
I find that difficult because I don't mind how messy it is. And I really don't want to see every personal thing, but I feel that you're part of a situation that I understand.
I think it does give you a window into what's going on in someone's life. But I've got to say, your room's looking pretty tasty too there, Susie. Pretty tasty. Beautiful piano. You got
Yeah.
all the music beautifully organized, double bass, lovely comfy chair near some sunlight. I mean, I like it. I like it very much. This is very messy in here. We're currently half living in my studio as well, so it's slightly complicated. But it is. Yeah, it's a dream, isn't it, to have a room where you can just play.
Oh, it is a complete dream. And there seem to be lots of different playhouses within our home. But what I don't understand is why are you lot partly living in that room at the moment? What's going on that means that you have to have your space kind of filled with family and other things?
Yes, it's just to do with the very exciting kind of things when you have stuff done to your house, like having to redo pipe work and stuff. It's so unexciting. I can't even begin to tell you, but we do have a few things to use in here, so it's all good. It's fine.
Yeah, redoing pipe work. Maybe there's a really interesting way of saying that that sounds incredibly exciting. But I agree with you. It doesn't sound good, but it's going to feel really great. Maybe that's true of one's internal pipe work as well. You know, if your internal pipe work's going well, it means the world's going to be happier, yeah?
I don't actually know how my internal pipe work's doing. I should have it checked out.
Oh, I think you know.
Okay, I'll take it.
I think you always know. So, do you remember all those years ago when we were in Marseille and you were in the middle of a tour and Jacob had done a gig at the same place? And this is years ago. And we didn't get to see yours because I think we weren't there in time. And then Jacob did his. And then we saw you after your gig. And we came backstage. Sophie was ill. Ella was with me, quite small. And we had a real conversation. Now, it's a long time ago, but I don't know. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. I remember it very well. I remember meeting you. I remember chatting to you, and I remember. Obviously, I knew a lot about Jacob at that point, and we conversed before. And I'd never met you, but I felt like you were one of those people that was very easy to have a rapport with quite quickly. It's in a disarming way, which I really like when I meet people. I go, oh, it's a shame we're backstage because this could get very interesting very quickly. You must hear that a lot, though, right?
Don't say that. You must hear that. I'm back at you with a mirror. I just remember. I mean, there was a lot of joy, and it was a really hot and balmy night, and we didn't waste any time. we just talked about the things that were hard and tricky to navigate, and we talked about the things that are obviously joy-giving and bountiful and beautiful. But it's interesting because that's quite a long time ago. But I guess if that was in 2007-ish, something like that. Was that right? No, maybe it's more like
No, I think it was. I think it was a bit
later. Oh no, it's 2017.
I think it was around that time. Yes, it would have been around that
2017.
time because I think I had very young children at that time, and it was a wonderful time, but also a very tricky juggle for my for everything, for my work, my life, and just trying to kind of fit everything in. It's kind of a blur that time when I had young kids and I was still trying to do what I'm doing now, just kind of finding the way of balancing it all together. So I think if I remember, I was very, very tired, but very glad to be doing what I was doing still, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, you were. You also really acknowledged how it felt to be you being a young gun and embracing the kind of rock star mentality for a while. But I guess I don't remember all the details of what we talked about because I think it's a long time ago, whenever it was. But I want to know, how easy was it for you? It's not going to be the same for anybody else, but how easy was it for you to unexpectedly find the love of your life and to realize that you had another half, and you had a life that was becoming broader and bigger and more wonderful in every way. And yet you'd had a certain kind of a lifestyle, and lifestyles are kind of habitual, aren't they? You get used to doing certain things. So how did you make that transformation?
Well, I think we're probably always making that transformation, aren't we? And when your hobby and your passion is your job, as well, I think it is always a constant. It's always a constant balance between the two. But I also think that I had a really good opportunity to get many kind of things out of my system. And I don't mean that in a crude way. I just think because I didn't start off as a kind of as a child kind of trained musician, or it wasn't like I had the rigorous musical training as a young man, or as a boy at all. By the time you were meeting me, my interest in learning about the mechanics of music had become so much more a part of who I was. And so all the kind of initial kind of craziness of like hammering around the world and being at all these different events and parties and meeting all these different people, that was really fun. But it was never the draw. It was never the draw for me. It was always a really fun side, like a fun side project, as it would be for any kind of young person in their 20s. So by the time I was married and having kids, I think my interest in trying to kind of deepen my musical knowledge and deepen my songwriting, deepen my lyric writing, just deepening everything was so great. It seemed like also a time when I was deepening my relationships as well. And so I guess I was a lucky recipient of some good timing there.
Okay, so we can say that timing is really serendipitous, and aren't we lucky? Because actually, I think we can see most things in a serendipitous kind of a way. But you kind of said, well, I didn't have that rigorous musical training. And I know you didn't have that rigorous musical training, but you say that the kind of the parties and stuff wasn't the draw. It was a kind of a sideline. But then what was the most important thing for you at that point? If it wasn't rigorous musical training and it wasn't the parties and the lifestyle and meeting famous people, then, and you hadn't met Sophie yet. So what was it?
Well, it was, I think that journey from taking something that you make in your room or a very familiar place that is very intimate to you, your piano in your house or your guitar in your bedroom or whatever, and kind of translating that into something that other people connect with. I think that was always the drug. And it's funny that Jacob obviously ended up doing a version of my song All at Sea on stage. And
I know, it's so special.
it's really amazing for me because I wrote that song before I had a record deal. I wrote it because I had a gig at the Pizza Express 3 weeks later, and I thought I really want to write something that's kind of got like two separate sections to it that feels a tiny bit like a Billy Joel song with a bit of a Radiohead bit in the middle. I just had this idea, and I'd just come back from this cruise ship, and I'd split up with someone, and I was enjoying being alone and not having to kind of answer to anyone but me. And this song kind of came together, and I wrote it purely for myself and purely for the fact that I had a gig coming up. And it was always a huge surprise to me when people connected to it. But when people did connect to it, you get this, that is the thing that kept drawing me back in. And so it's just going back to the well and seeing if that can happen. And that hasn't changed. That has literally been the major constant. And then you revisit these songs year in, year out, and they get deeper in different ways and they mean different things to you. And that's really the thing that keeps me returning to the well, really.
I love the idea of returning to the well, because I kind of misheard you first time, and I kind of thought it was a kind of well, and it could be a kind of a well, because I quite like the idea that the well can be this unbelievable depth of beautiful things, but also well can have a question mark, because it's what you're being drawn to at any given time. Okay, so you say that song was written all those years ago, and isn't that nice that Jacob has taken it on and he's done that thing? And I think we're also surprised when people talk about Jacob's first album, In My Room, and they say, oh, you know, it's this, or it's Hajanga, or it's something that seems such a long time ago. It seems like a lifetime ago. And it's very easy, I think, for the first thought to be, well, what about the stuff I'm doing now? Don't you love that? And yet people go back to the first things you do. Now, I think that's partly a need in them, because it's really lovely to just see where the creativity was born from, I think, in many ways. But saying that your love for it was when you realized how important it was to connect, okay, and how that you could make a difference with that communication with everybody. But were you always the person, the child, the person growing up in your family with your bro and your folks and everybody? Were you the person who always had those communication skills? Or do you think that came and was nurtured once you started the connectivity that you had with your music?
I would say it was probably always there and historically there within my family lineage. You know, my mum and my granddad, they're the Burmese Indian side of the family who came over here when my mum was very little, as refugees from the war that was happening there. They loved music and would play music in a capacity for fun and also a way of earning money at the weekends and stuff. And so it was there, but the opportunity to kind of follow it up in a professional way would have been such an anomaly to them. And so I witnessed music happening in the house as a source of joy. And I was drawn to it, but I think that willingness to connect with people and have music that connected with people was drawn out of me by actually happening first. And maybe people that knew me younger would say that differently, you know, because I would sing occasionally in a school play. But I don't know whether I was the kid in front of the mirror with the hairbrush to the microphone. I don't think I was dreaming about that. You know, my dream jobs when I was a teenager was probably thought, I'd like to write, not, you know, I was always a big reader, so I'd like to write books or maybe be a journalist, or I've always loved photography and I thought I'd love to maybe be a cinematographer or a photographer or something. So it was a behind idea and never quite the confidence to think that I could do something in music as a front man. Yeah, I was nibbling at the heels of it. You know, I was in bands as a teenager. I was always a side man, never the front man, but playing a bit of piano here, playing a bit of guitar there, loving the scene of being involved in music. But it always felt like a fun hobby and a great way to go to parties. There we go, back to that. It was a way of feeling a sense of, you know, we all have a crutch as a teenager, I think. And I think, you know, music, definitely carrying a guitar around and playing all the Nirvana songs by heart was definitely something I had in my back pocket, you know. But as a source of my life's kind of work, I wouldn't have dreamed of it at 15 or 16. But, you know, by the time I was halfway through my English and film degree, I was like, well, I had a lot of gigs and I was really starting to, you know, make people very happy by going to people's weddings and playing standards and in a couple of bands I was in. So it felt, I could feel the draw of it, but as it rolled on, I think as soon as things started to really connect, stuff that came from my very soul, things that I didn't quite know where they came from, but how did I birth this into the world? When that stuff happened and people really connected with it, that was when the addiction to it really began.
Addiction is a really much maligned word, isn't it? We talk about it and it always seems to have negative connotations, right? And maybe in the most positive sense, this addiction is just saying, I love food for the soul and we are all selfish beings, so bring it on. Okay, that's fine. But it's quite interesting, the terminology that you use, because you say that once it came from the very soul, there's nothing to question because it's there, isn't it? So you can't argue with it because you know what you're giving out, you know it's really real, and you're giving that out into the world. But what is also interesting is that when you describe what it was like before, well, I suppose when you were in your teens, I like the idea that it was a behind idea and that you didn't have any wish to be the front man. And that's interesting because you also said that you weren't really the person with the hairbrush in the hand and the mirror and doing all that kind of stuff. But you obviously love being out there and giving it what you got. And that's what we recognise. That's what Jacob and I recognised when we did come and see you at the Royal Albert Hall, and that must have been 2007 or 8. And that was the first time we saw you from the gods. We were lucky to get these tickets, and it just changed our lives. So it really did. And
Wow.
it's important that you kind of understand that the love in speaking to you right now comes from years and years of love, because of the way that you've influenced all of us, me and all the 3 kids. Really, truly.
Wow.
It's absolutely
well. Thank you for saying so. I really appreciate you saying that. And I think I've said to Jacob before when we've spoken that any minuscule role that I've played in the development of what he has become is such a humbling thing for me to know, as someone who's always felt very. I think what you just hit upon is this idea of loving that, kind of being that, kind of having that energy to be like a front man, and where that came from. I think it was really, it's like a synthesis of a few things, isn't it? Because I loved hip hop and rock music when I was growing up, and I watched a lot of those people. I think when I saw Harry Connick Jr. being a bit more of a rock star on stage, Ben Folds was another great example, behind the piano and bringing that. So I kind of, when I started being on stage, I would go and see a lot of jazz concerts, and I would love the music, and I would think, God, that person can't talk to the audience. And it just gradually became a moment where I thought, well, if I brought this together, then it might bring the music out more. I don't think it was as conscious as that, but I think that's what my subconscious was doing, bringing all these things that I'd synthesized together. And I think by the time you saw me at the proms, whilst I say this with great love to myself back then, whilst my musicality has always had a very kind of raw, unformed quality, which I'm really enjoying readdressing now. I think bringing all these different things together with love and kind of some major abandon to it was not like anything I'd quite seen myself and wanted to bring to the stage. And at that point, I guess it was connecting with people, which is a miracle, really. And again, what you've said is received with such love as well. So thank you very much.
No. It's the most important thing I really feel that I would like to convey today. But I think the idea that you're saying you would go to gigs and you'd think, well, that person didn't communicate so well, or that could have been done in a slightly different way, or maybe with your artistic hat on. Well, if they just thought about what they look like when they turn around, or how the light is hitting them, then maybe it'd be better. You're bringing all these things to the table, and it's as though you're not hatching plans, but you're evolving really quite quietly. But I think that a lot of the time we're told you shouldn't be assessing a gig that you go to and with an eye of critique at all. You should just go and just saying, this is just a really, really great thing, and I know there's something to get from this. But I think what I hear from you, and what I agree with, is that it's really important as performers to be able to assess what you think works and what doesn't work, because otherwise you can't assess yourself in that way, can you?
I think so. I really do try and go and see things without that brain in motion, without kind of thinking about it in that way. I think sometimes you can't help yourself, and I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing in that way. But I think also you just pick up something from everywhere, don't you? You literally, you can't help it if you are curious and creative. And I love that book. I'm sure you've read it. It puts it in very plain terms: Steal Like an Artist.
Oh, I know.
Do you know that book? Yeah. It's the most direct way of explaining how we just all take those things. And really, when I kind of turned up in 2003, I was kind of dressing a bit like kind of Jamie Oliver was, and kind of trying to be a bit like kind of Kurt Cobain and Liam Gallagher, failing miserably, obviously. And I kind of loved Harry Connick Jr. and Thelonious Monk and Nat King Cole, but also Ben Folds and all those things. And they kind of, that little soup kind of came together on those first few appearances on TV, and that's that's kind of how it came together, really. I guess on reflection, it's hard for me to really think about it, but a lot of piano bar gigs as well. You know, a lot of
Oh,
things
yes.
like that. But so knowing a lot of those old tunes, and I guess playing also in a lot of different types of bands, rock bands, and playing keys in this rock band I was in that was doing quite well at the time was a real bringing a bit of that and to the jazz energy as well. Was, they'd tell me to not play the jazz chords when I was in that band, so I'd leave the jazz chords out, but I'd take the kind of the moves from that band into I guess some of the jazz concerts I was doing, or the more jazz concerts I was doing.
Yeah, but in the jazz concerts that you were doing, were they saying, can you kind of rock a little bit less?
It was funny because I remember being on tour with this band Taxi I was in, and we were supporting this amazing band called Electric Soft Parade. And I'd just seen Ben Folds play the week before, and he'd done this whole song where he stood on top of the grand piano, on top of the lid, actually, not actually inside like I do. And then a week later, I was playing with this band Taxi, and the band we were supporting, the great band actually called Electric Soft Parade, and I saw the guy standing, the keyboard player in the background, stand at the end of this mental song, standing on his Moog synthesizer. And I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. So I channeled a bit of that. And by the time I took that back to, I don't know, the Bull's Head in Barnes or whatever, or any of the jazz clubs like in Eastbourne or whatever, you suddenly feel like you're bringing this kind of Sid Vicious energy to those rooms that don't see that. And actually, I think as long as I tried to make sure that the music had the real backbone of what was, just had a proper backbone. I guess it was refreshing at the time, right? It was quite unusual. And again, I didn't really overthink it. It just came together with that madness of youth where you mercifully don't overthink too many things, and no social media, no one telling me not to do it.
No.
So I just kind of cracked on.
So there are so many different thoughts in here. I love the idea of Sid Vicious energy, and I think something, we all have a need to express Sid Vicious energy sometimes, and it's so precious. It's such a precious part of ourselves, and I think if it can be given in a positive way, then everybody wins, really. But I think you name Steele like an artist, and I remember picking up that book and just again kind of stealing like a gannet, just kind of pecking in there and just thinking, oh yes, and oh yes, and oh yes. And then after that book came out, there was a real awareness of how we shouldn't be tokenizing things. So it's okay to pick things up, but when it comes to really important elements of culture, then perhaps we ought to be a little bit careful not to tokenize and to think you've kind of just got it just because you're wearing the hat. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's an interesting point. And I think I was very aware when I saw Harry Connick Jr. it would have been on one of those morning TV shows, TVAM or something, when I was 10 or 11 or something. And he said, I try to play piano like Thelonious Monk and Professor Longhair. I'm like, I knew Thelonious Monk. I was like, who's Professor Longhair? I had no idea about this whole subsidiary of New Orleans piano players with that whole different sound. And I try to sing like Frank. I'm like, okay, well, Frank Sinatra, I know. Thelonious Monk, who's this guy, Professor Longhair? And I think it works when you are stealing, if we use the word stealing, but you also know where the person before stole it from. I heard this beautiful story the other day about the song "Life on Mars," the David Bowie song that I love so much, and how much it was inspired by the least cool song of all time, "My Way," which I had no idea. Which My Way was inspired by a kind of French chanson kind of thing, and that was just the whole journey of that song. And you hear "Life on Mars," you think, oh my God, one of the great kind of most brilliant songs ever written. And by the time Elton John had made Rocket Man, David Bowie was a bit annoyed with Elton John for stealing his Man in Space song, and it being a bigger hit than Life on Mars. And I think all these things kind of go through where it's like genes, isn't it? It's like memes and genes. All these things, they cross pollinate, and we end up with what we have. And I think as an artist, to have some awareness of that. It's one of the things I really really appreciate about what Jacob does is he's always talking about where things are coming from and the lineage of it. And because there's no need to hide it. You know, it's like, I'm inspired by this, I'm
That's
inspired by
right.
this, and it's taking me on this journey.
The idea of no need to hide is a really important ethos in our family. I don't know what it's like with your kids, but I think it's not as though we've got a neon sign that says, you know, don't hide what you're thinking, or, you know, don't hide what you're wanting to do. It's just, it seems that it's better that we communicate things and we're a bit open about it. And I think that that means that perhaps we're perceived as being a bit of an off-the-wall family because, yeah, we do all wear Crocs and we listen to all sorts of music, and it's really okay that we listen to all sorts of music, and I'm really not embarrassed about that. And I've got such a great belief that, you know, when you ask a group of people what music you into, what you see first of all with a group of people is you see stark fear, because they're thinking, I'm going to be judged for saying that I actually think that my way is the best song that's ever been written, and nothing has been any better since then. So it's quite important, perhaps, to just consider what you feel is important to so-called hide and what you're willing to share and be open to the world with. So if I said to you, what do you feel in essence are things that you may need to just keep to yourself because they are part of your own process? What kind of things would you say are so-called sort of being slightly hidden with no lineage?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question to kind of to answer in an immediate way, but I think when I look back, when I've been forced to look back at old interviews with myself, particularly recently, because actually 20 something is 20 years old this year. And so they're putting various things together to kind of re-release the album on vinyl and stuff, which is lovely. But what's interesting is that whenever I do interviews back in those days, I'm always talking about the people that I love and how, like, you know, I'm a student of this music. I'm trying my best. There are so many good people out there. It's like, I'm so conscious of that. And not in an annoyingly humble way, actually. I always thought I was, because I think for me, my lack of knowledge and really understanding what a dominant chord was, even back then, you know, just knowing kind of how it sounded, but not really understanding what a 5 to a 1 chord actually was.
Yeah.
But I felt very I felt nervous about that. And I think people talk a lot about imposter syndrome, and I was kind of living that out, but I guess in my own way being quite honest about it. But I think I would really worry about that. I'd worry about what other musicians would think when they saw me play an actual solo. They go, well, he doesn't really understand what key he's in. And yeah, it swings, the time feels good, but the notes are all over the place, and it's not within, you know, he's not someone who understands what arpeggios are, or approach notes, or all those, the bebop language, all that kind of stuff. I think as someone now who's really, you know, I've actually started taking lessons in the last 3 years for the first time properly in my life, like studying with Pete Churchill, funny enough. Started Pete. During the pandemic, really kind of helping me get some stuff together, and it's so fun for me, so rewarding. But I think that was something I felt very much was something that should be kept more hidden. I think if we're talking about hiding, and also I think that the way I try to live my life now is much more open about how I feel and what's happening, because I don't know whether I obviously grew up in a family like that, wonderful family as they were. I think they were taught to keep a lot hidden due to them, both sides of my family being, you know, first generation in this country.
Absolutely.
And kind of having to kind of fit in. And I think you know, generationally, one wasn't encouraged to share everything then anyway, let alone if you were Indian or Jewish with a German accent. You know, I think it's you know, very, 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 very different way of thinking. And so that is something I have developed in my, should we say, in my mid 40s, and hopefully would impart to my my new family. It's a constant journey, that kind of stuff. But I'm fascinated by the idea of what happens to kids that grow up in environments like the one you're describing. And of course, a great example of that are your children. So it's really interesting to me now as a parent, and also someone who grew up in quite a different way, but no less loving, of course, but just different culture, really.
But I think surely we all grew up in a different culture. I mean, you literally grew up in a different culture and a mix of different cultures. I did too, but I think that I was the product of a particular time of growing up at a particular time with parents who were born just so many years before. And it's quite interesting because you alluded to imposter syndrome, and I have felt that an awful lot this year. And I have really wonderful friends who really are just so supportive. And I have one colleague, and I said, I can't believe it. Even before going and conducting this orchestra, I'm still feeling it. I'm thinking, an older woman wielding a baton, really? Is that the thing? And she said, the thing is that you're thinking like that, not because you totally believe it, but because you are a product of the time that you grew up, when actually that really wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing at all. And I didn't grow up in a household where things were just open an awful lot of the time. That became an awful lot later. But I think it is interesting that we talk about it as though it's our past, but I think a lot of what we feel right now is because of the time that we grew up in.
Yes, there's a book I just finished actually by it's Ian McEwan's latest book. It's called Lessons, which I highly recommend. It kind of spans the whole life of this man in the last, I would say, from just when was his boyhood? Well, the last, say, 80 to 90 years. And it really speaks so beautifully about the difference in generations and how we relate to one another. It's so nuanced. It's really, I'd recommend it. It speaks to exactly what you're just speaking about.
I will definitely go there. Ian McEwan doesn't waste any words, and
He doesn't. And this is a big book.
Yeah. And this is unbelievable descriptions, but some of the realities are just really shocking in there. But I think that's great. I think that's absolutely wonderful. So, we talk about lineage, and we talk about hiding things or being open, and we talk about the fact that we've grown up in a different era with folks from different parts of the world. But you have your kids right now, and we're always saying, you got to bring the flock, and you got to bring them all here, and you say, oh yeah, they're quite young, they might just run around a bit. And I'm saying, no, it's fine. And we will do it one day, probably when they're married and have kids. But I think the thing is, I wonder what kind of ethos you and Sophie don't necessarily make a list and don't even necessarily verbalize, but I wonder what you feel that you are giving to them. And it doesn't matter if they were in the room right now and they listen to you, it wouldn't really matter whether they felt that was absolutely bang on or not. I'm just wondering actually what you feel you're giving out. What they feel they're receiving is a different question.
I think it's just about talking, really. As vague as that may sound, but I'll elaborate a bit. But I think we all talk a lot, and it doesn't matter how deep it goes. And how much needs explaining about complex things. And we love to talk. We love to read. We love to know things. We are a curious pair, me and my wife, and it's what connected us instantly. About curious about everything. And I think for me, that's what it's all about. Really, is remaining curious, knowing there is only more to know. And I think when I would have heard that 20 years ago, it would sound like the kind of thing an old man says to a young person. Well, stay curious, young man.
I know.
But I think it's so clear to me that the more these days, that the more you go deeper into something, the more it appears mysterious. And that is whilst that can sound a bit scary, it's actually the great thing about everything. As soon as
Yes,
you get
isn't
interested in something,
it?
you dive in, and it's like, oh my god, this is amazing. I know nothing. I literally, like, sometimes I think, yeah, I've got all my stuff down in the key of E flat, and I go, nope, you haven't even started. Let alone F sharp or B or all the other hard keys. It's like, I think I can play an E flat, and then I go, actually, no, there's actually, oh, did you know there's drop threes as well as drop twos, and there's drop fours, and there's the moo chord, and there's all these different permutations of just I could spend my lifetime just in E flat, and that's great. I love that. So I think it's that idea that talking and curiosity and depth is actually more exciting. Yeah.
Okay. But isn't it interesting that you're exploring E flat? And boy, you've done that for really quite a long time, quite a few decades. And then you realize, I know nothing. I know nothing about E flat. I really know nothing about E flat. Now, there's a very fine line, isn't there, between I know nothing, so let's get on in there, and I know nothing, so I'm giving up because something, I've done this for all these years, but I've just realized that I know nothing. So how do you keep on the right side of the line?
Well, as I'm sure you know, you just keep chipping away, because some days you feel differently. Some days you can sit at the coal face and you feel like, oh, I'm getting nowhere, and actually, about half an hour later, if you push on through, suddenly you feel like you were really getting somewhere exciting, and like, oh, and I think also for me, because it's got so much less to do with how it translates to the traditional forms of success these days, as much as I still live with the kind of belief that the next thing I do will be the best thing I've done, which is, I think, how we all keep going, whatever that means. I do think that when I'm exploring these things, they are scratching my own itch, and they're pleasurable. I guess it's how some people feel about golf, right? Every time they go and play golf, or how some people feel about anything that any pursuit. People that maybe paint. My dad loves to paint. He's not painting for a gallery. He's going to be 80 next year. Very
Oh,
young feeling person, but he loves to paint, and he's not planning an exhibition. And I'm sitting here playing with E flat. It's not because my next album's going to be in E flat. It's because it feels so good. Sometimes when you're just like, oh my God, that connects, that feels so good. It reminds me of Bill Evans, or it reminds me of the people that I love. Just for half a second, I felt like that. And it's just joyful.
right. So actually, it seems that when you know nothing, but you get a glimmer of something that's really shiny bright, and Bill Evans, you can't get more shiny bright than, oh, actually, you can't get more warm, then that's really wonderful. But it seems like success is in a different bucket. That's in a bucket over here, and that you're not equating your knowledge of E flat to success in any way, correct?
No, I mean, I'm not, and I think it helps deepen songs and albums and all those kind of things if you're not connecting it. I think to leave it alone entirely, it's a tricky balance. It's another juggle, that one. But I think I've been doing it long enough now to know that if I follow my own definition of success, then things will keep going. Because actually, all I think most of us want to do that get involved in music that's not necessarily like top 20 kind of pop music, whatever that means these days, is that you want to just keep doing it. You want to create a kind of cyclical, sustainable model where you have enough in your arsenal where people are like, yeah, I'd love to see that person. Oh, they've got another gig coming up. Great. Oh, they've got an album coming out. I'll give it a listen. I think that is where you want to be, because the rest of it's quite fleeting and changeable. And I think it's best not to kind of hold on to those things that are so very fickle. And I think I realized that quite soon in my career. And the things that have really helped me do that, having the radio show, meeting and getting to chat to so many brilliant musicians who are, interviewing Dave Brubeck. I interviewed him about 2 months before he died at Newport Jazz Festival.
Lucky,
And I
lucky
had this,
boy, lucky.
yeah, I had the beautiful interview with him. And at the end of the interview, I said, "So, what's happening to you? What are you doing after Newport?" He says, "I'm going home. So, it's something I really want to work on." I said, "Are you working on a new album?" He goes, "No, it's just a practice thing. I've got this. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said he wanted to work on some particular thing with his piano playing, and he records his practice and listens back." And I'm like, there it is, man. It's right there. You climb the top of the tree and you've just seen that there's a taller tree next to you. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna go up there now. You know, it's very cool. Very, very cool.
I was always brought up to record practice, and I remember just feeling so uncomfortable doing that. And my dad had a wonderful reel to reel, so it wasn't just kind of get your phone out. It was kind of, no, go in the music room, close the door, press the button, make sure it's going properly, check the microphone, and then you've got to put it down. So already, you know, you've walked on a stage at the Royal Albert Hall and the audience is there and the lights are on and you just got to go and do it. And it really does something, doesn't it, to not only put something out there, but to own it by going back in there, which in your days of thinking, oh, maybe I'm going to write a novel, you would have written down things and they would have been there to go back onto again and again and again and again. It's slightly different with the performance, isn't it?
It is. And I think, you know, particularly in those early days where I was so busy and, you know, practice was not a thing I got to do for 5 or 6 years.
No, of course not.
And, you know, I listened back to some of those things in this process of hearing stuff for the 20-something reissue. And, you know, there's I hear a lot of the time I hear someone who sounds very tired. I hear someone who's really having a great time, but I can also just hear how tired I was. And I think, oh, I remember that performance being really fun, but now when I listen back, it's so rough around the edges. It's not like listening back to something, oh, this is an incredible archive piece. I'm like, oh my God, it sounds like you don't actually have a voice left.
Yes.
And you know, it's very, very interesting for me to hear that, because to listen back and still have kind of, you know, try and love that for what it is. But they were crazy times. You know, there was just, you know, I was pinging around all over the place in a somewhat different era to the one we are in now, where you didn't say no to anything. You didn't say, oh my God, I'm a bit tired and I really miss home, you know. There's no part of me that's saying have sympathy for me, but you do see why people are driven slightly mad. It was an era where if you kind of said, well, I don't want to do that because I'm too tired, I'd be like, oh, well, you probably won't have a record deal this time next month then, you know.
Yes.
And I think, you know, mercifully people are talking a lot more about how it feels to be kind of out there, kind of hammering away at your career and actually maybe needing a bit of a time out here and there, because we live in a more open time, you know.
I really hope that we do live in a more open time. I really hope so. And I believe that we're getting there, albeit we're taking our time. But the idea of the guy saying, I'm just too tired to do this, and then the person who he's having the whole conversation with says, well, actually, that's it, curtains. I don't think you're going to get a record deal. I think that philosophy is still very much there in certain situations. And I think for those young artists who we just hope are going to have some kind of journey that feels life affirming and is a really good thing, I think a lot of young people will do anything in order to get the so-called, well, the record deal of the old days.
Sure.
And
yeah.
I know that you are so caring of young talent and young people. It's just clear with who you choose to interview and who you've taken an interest with or who you've played with. But how do we say to these young people that, you know something, you don't have to do anything you don't feel completely comfortable with, and you don't have to do anything unless you really feel it's the right thing for you? How do you think we emphasize that in the way that we are in the world?
Yeah, it's tricky because there's that balance also between, well, it is also really hard. You know,
I know,
how hard Jacob works, and you know, obviously yourself, but obviously someone who's on this kind of trajectory of just only upward motion, where, you know, I'm sure he has to turn down way more things than he takes on, and I think it is hard, and it's not for everyone. So there is that, and I think that is to not paint it that way, I think does people a disservice. You know, it's not one with a lot of job security. It is one where you have to be really sure of what you want. And the thing is, it's hard to know what you want. I think nowadays people say compare and despair, but actually in some ways you're much more aware of the career trajectory now when you're a young artist versus I think even when I was starting, you'd kind of read about it in rock biographies or something, or in the interviews in the Sunday newspapers or something. You'd hear about it, but nowadays every step of it is so, you can do YouTube courses about how to start your career. Everything is so much more. There's so much more information. So I think that is all a good thing. But knowing what it is you want to achieve is the most important thing, but it's also the hardest thing to know, because then you know what to say no to. You can decide, well, yeah. That would be the main thing, I think. But they're all very, very hard things to know, because actually you find out what you want to do, I think, a lot of the time through doing.
What you don't want to do.
And exactly, and that was very much what happened to me, doing things that have been massive in my career. Doing the song for Bridget Jones, for example, was a huge moment in my career. But
enormous.
But it was not something that afterwards I realized I don't do songs that someone's told me to do in a way that I'm told to do. That didn't make me feel good, but it was really good. But musically, it never kind of sat with me. But people love that version of that song, and I don't discredit it, but I think it really did teach me a lot. I knew that I didn't want to make a repeat album of the one I made before, because it would cease to be as interesting. But I was told to make something very similar. And I think some people are very good at that. And they go, right, this has been successful, so I'm going to repeat the success. I saw Lewis Capaldi talking about it in that documentary. Make something a bit like what you've done before, because that's what the people want. And that's very much what I was advised to do and didn't do, and possibly to my career detriment, I don't know. But I knew then that it was like, I need to carry on in this path if I'm going to bother doing this, because it's hard. And because it's hard, you may as well really like what you're doing, because otherwise there's not much of a point.
There's not much of a point. But, we talk about the folks who tell us to do a similar thing because, look, that worked. And in the end, I'm saying, and it's a rhetorical question, you don't have to say, well, it's Joe Bloggs from 2 blocks down. Who are these people who feel that they know you in such a way that they can say, we know that if only you do an album that's really similar to the one before, you're absolutely going to ace it and you're going to get this and that and the other. And if you go against us, we just don't think it's going to happen for you. And then you can look back and you think, oh, I wonder whether I should have done exactly what they said.
I've been lucky to have mainly had industry people around me that I've been respectful and mostly pretty honest, and but not forcing me in any particular direction. I think a lot of those times, those people that we're talking about are people that have seen it happen many times before.
Okay.
So I think from an industry point of view, they go, well, this tends, 7 times out of 10, this way is going to work better than the way you want to do it. But that would be my advice. But let's maybe follow it in this direction. Again, I think, when 20 something became such a big record, that was way more than anyone expected. And I was like, oh my God, some guy who's like doing a kind of version of jazz mixed with like pop and like Radiohead and Jimi Hendrix. It's like, okay, that's worked. Well, can you do that again? I'm like, I don't know whether I can,
Yes.
But it's funny looking at this stuff in hindsight as it is with everything, because really you're just we're all kind of flailing around in the dark and just keeping the flame going, aren't we, really?
Yeah, I think we are. But I think I love the way that you describe it, because that feels much more whole to me. That basically, when you're given advice by the industry, they're just saying, we've seen this work. So, 7 out of 10 dog owners say that this dog food really worked for them. Let's give it a go. And, but the thing about creativity is that it's a bit of a Ooh, well, that's a bit, the creativity within oneself that's also a bit fickle, actually, as well as the industry being fickle. So if your creativity in here hears, oh, well, you've got to create in a particular kind of a way, I think a lot of the time it says, well, I'm not going to do that. I don't feel like doing that. And I don't feel like, just bringing it on. I want to do something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, but all you know to do there with your creativity is just to keep going. To keep moving like a shark. You just keep kind of going and trust that you continue to channel, really. And some days you don't, some days you do. It's a mystery, but I think knowing that it's a mystery, but the part that isn't mysterious is just the showing up part. That's the point, right? That's certainly how I feel about it, anyway.
Yeah. But I think in order to feel the shark who's going to poke his snout this way and then that way, you've got to have. I'm just visualizing him right now. I'm sure you could draw him. I just feel you've got to have some real self-respect and you've got to have real self-worth. So how do we get more self-worth? Because in a sense, we could say, well, it was great for you because you did have the 20-something thing, and everybody knew about it. Everybody loved it. I don't know a single person who says I didn't like that album. It's absolutely amazing. So you have that as a kind of a rock to go from, and no one's going to take that away from you. Whatever you do since, whatever you've done since, or whatever you're going to do in the future, no one's going to take away that. But I think for a lot of people who won't necessarily get a 20-something experience in their life, how do they make sure that they have enough self-respect and self-worth to feel that they can give something to the world?
Yeah, it's an almost unanswerable question, particularly from someone who's had a 20-something moment, I guess.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it's easy for me to say, but I do believe in the inherent joy of depth, whatever that is. So I think it's a bit like, for me, it's because I love reading so much. If I really concentrate on something I'm reading, I get something out of it. Obviously, if it's a terrible novel, then I don't. But by and large, I tend to read in a direction where it's been recommended, or I've got an idea that the writer is going to be good, or whatever. So if I go into it and I get into it with depth, it's rewarding. And I think with music or a creative career, if you are going into it with, I'm going to get into this deeply, I'm not going to half-ass it. I'm going to try and write the best songs I can. I'm going to, if I'm a lyric writer, I'm going to make sure they mean something. They're not just words that fit with the song. If they're melodies, I'm going to make sure they feel beautiful to me. If the beat is going to slap, then I'm going to make sure it slaps so hard that I fall on the floor every time I press play.
Okay.
If those things resonate with you, then I feel as though then an element of it within it you kind of can't lose.
Okay.
And again, I know it's easy for me to say that, but so many of my favorite things I've done are the things that people have hardly listened to versus the things that people have really listened to. And most artists say the same. Most artists say the same. It's not their most popular thing is the favorite thing that they've done, but occasionally it comes together. And 20 years into my career, I wrote a song that I believed to be by far and above the best song I'd written. And it was something that was really, it was recognized with the Ivor Novello Award and was, has been really taken on by people, a song called The Age of Anxiety. And I wouldn't have seen that coming. But I was very aware that things had moved on a little bit in my writing, and that was a good feeling. And I think every career goes like this, but to know that kind of connected, it's kind of proof to me that actually if you keep plugging away with things that really resonate with you, then by and large you might find that it works out somewhere, maybe not in the way you expected, but maybe it works out.
I really love that, because I think what underlies that is the idea that you've got to believe in what you're doing. And again, I think, when you make a sound on the piano or you find a chord, there's nothing big-headed about just saying, I love that sound just right now. That's really
Yeah.
great. I did just for that moment. That was really
Hmm.
nice. That's good. Then you're building up a library of lovely things. We've talked about words quite a lot, and your lyrics again mean an awful lot to our family. And we're sitting around having supper, and Sophie just said, the words of photograph. They're in my heart and soul all the time. I could just,
Oh, wow.
it's always there. And we've all got our favourites, but just like you being 20 something, 30 something, 40 something, and you're going to go on and on and on, hopefully, your lyrics will evolve, but I don't know whether you think about them in a different way, or you care and nurture them and hold them close to your heart in a different way now from when you were 20 something. Is it a different process for you now?
It is. And, there are certain lyrics that I've written that when I sing them now, I don't cringe, but I think I would write that differently now.
Yeah.
There's a line in 20 something, perfect example, where I'm still having fun. And I guess that's the key. I'm a 20 something and I'll keep being me.
Oh,
Right.
yes, that's
I
right.
wouldn't
Yes.
write, I wouldn't write that lyric now. It doesn't feel like the kind of lyric I would write now, but it did come out of me at that time in a way that was honest, that I didn't overthink lyrics. I try not to overthink them now, but I definitely try and infuse them with more of the, I guess, a little more sophistication of thought and emotion, because hopefully I've evolved emotionally as a human being. And I think, well, I may as well write where I am now. If I was, and I have done a few co-writing sessions where, there's pop songwriting happening for another artist,
Yeah.
and the idea is to make it very, I've contributed something, and someone says, oh, that's great, but it's a little bit too, clever for this moment. Maybe we could
That's
put it further
right.
in the song
Yeah.
or something like that. And I think it's not that I'm trying to be too clever, but I think nowadays, I'm about 9 or 10 songs into a new record, which I hope to record later this year and release next year. They each verse, it when you've written a song, and the verse really has it's like a movie or an episode of great television or a great chapter of a book, where it has a movement to it, where it starts off, it poses a question, it makes you think about something in a new way, and then maybe at the end of the verse it kind of gives you just a little hint of the answer, or a hint of another idea, and then you move on and you develop it. And I'm really enjoying that journey now. It takes so long to fit it into a melody as well.
Yeah.
It's such a difficult process, but I would say I'm probably spending more time on that now than almost anything. Just trying to find a way where you have an opening first line where you go, oh, you go, right, that's a first line,
Okay.
and then you take it somewhere. So I think I do feel about it in a different way. All at sea, did I think about the lyrics I was writing? No, they just came out of me, and I was like, oh, that'll work. And I only revisit them now and go, God, I must have been feeling this way. And it's amazing how many people connect to that. I don't look at those lyrics and I don't feel embarrassed by those lyrics at all. I look at them and I think, wow, you were just channeling whatever was going on into a song. That was like the third song I wrote in my life, I think, that one, third or fourth song I'd ever written.
But then there must have been something really lovely about knowing that whether you had to write a song in time for the Pizza Express gig in 3 weeks' time or whatever, that you were going to put down lyrics, and if they scanned well and it felt really nice to sing, then let's not think too much about it. Let's just do it. So now you're saying,
Exactly.
hopefully I've evolved emotionally. I think we all do. We can't help it. All right. So we're evolving emotionally, and you're thinking that you're maybe resonating with the first line, and then maybe we can beget another line and another line. But you don't want it to be too clever, and you don't want people to just be thinking, oh, this is just overthought and it's not really coming from the heart. So it is a bit of a balance, isn't it?
It is, and I can hear that in songs I wrote maybe 5 years ago. again, being charitable to myself, if I think now, I think, well, actually, that is actually trying to be a bit too clever. And actually, you could have found words that work better within that melody that would have had the same effect. And it's that constant journey towards just getting better at it. And some people, Alex Turner is a great example of the Arctic Monkeys. They arrive as in my eyes, unimpeachable lyricists. And I just, how
utterly.
do you write a lyric like that at 21 years old? I think, Jacob in so many ways is amazingly humble and totally in possession of his talent. But, you hear someone young like that who just seems to command so much of their it's wonderful to see, but it's also enjoyable to see as I get older how I can criticize my work and not say it's bad, but go, okay, well, how will I do that better now? And that's why occasionally when I listen to my old stuff, I go, I always thought that lyric of that song was a bit better, but actually this is how I would do it now. And I think that's a good thing, because it means you're moving towards something, whatever it is, but you're moving towards something.
Well, I think it's a moment that we don't move that we've really got to just worry about it just a bit. I know that we've got lives to live and we've got to go and live them. But as far as I want to just ask one more thing about the lyrics side of things, because what do you feel first? Is it a fluid thing? Do you feel a melody first? Do you feel the lyrics coming and then you want to fit the melody over that? Or do you have a way of working that has kind of stayed with you all this time? Or is it really different every time?
I would say it is different every time, but I do love the space to just sit down at the piano and go, right, I've got no ideas, I've got no titles, I've got no lyrics, I've got no melodies, and I guess do what most people would call improvising and just hum and see what comes out. And occasionally a line will come out, whatever it is. I mean, The Age of Anxiety is a good example where I was just playing two chords, A major and C sharp minor, and I just sung, I just want to live inside sometimes. That's how it began. And I just I just want to live inside. What does that mean? This is pre-pandemic as well. And so
that's amazing. That's incredible.
That just came. And I don't know, if I think about it, I was inside. I was probably in a melancholic place. I was probably thinking, just leave me alone. I just want a bit of peace and quiet, whatever, I don't know. But I think that's where that song was born. And I went to my notebook and I saw a list of titles that said, write a song called The Age of Anxiety. And I thought, well, maybe, and then I put the two things together. So there's a notebook that goes along with titles and little lyric ideas and often lines I love from books that I like that I could kind of steal or mess around with, and kind of synthesizing those two things together seems to be the way. So, keeping a little garden growing of various ideas and seeing if they can meet up with improvisations and things that just come directly out of the sky.
So you have your little book of things, and we believe in books of things. Do you also put down voice memos as well, or is that just too formulaic?
Yes, no, definitely voice memos. But I would say voice memos normally come after I've got an idea.
Okay.
So I don't record 10 minutes of musings and then go back through it and try and find the good bit. I go to the voice memos afterwards. I don't know why that is, but that seems to be the way it happens.
Okay, it's just a delight. We've talked so much about words and indeed lyrics and Ian McEwan, and I've never asked anybody this, but what books would you just say you just got to have a look at right now? I've got Ian McEwan, which I'm definitely going to do, but is there anything else that has tickled your fancy in recent days?
So many things. Goodness me. Let me think. There's a book that I always really loved by Jhumpa Lahiri called The Namesake, which really helped me understand my grandparents a lot more with the Indian connection there. So I've always really loved that book. I think I always keep a book of Mary Oliver poetry nearby. Just for kind of wisdom and belief in what's amazing. this the lesson that the Ian McEwan book really is one of the more kind of staggering things I've read recently. I literally finished it a week ago, and I haven't been able to start something new
Oh, I love
since
that.
then,
That's a very special
because I'm just
feeling.
like, what? I've started a few different things. It's like there's nothing that's immediately available to me that I feel is going to touch it for now. So, and of course, the books that brought so much to me as a reader anyway, all the Philip Pullman books. If anyone's not read them, they're kind of guiding stars for me as well.
Did you see the adaptation, the TV adaptation?
Yes, yeah, which I loved. I thought they did a brilliant job.
They didn't they do the most unbelievable job? And then we couldn't leave it there. So then we had to go into Audible and to listen to all the adaptations. And then
That's
when
it.
you get to the end, I mean, there's Ella in Germany, and she's saying, I'm getting near to the end of the Amber Spyglass, and she said,
What am I going to do?
So I'm not gonna listen to it because I don't want it to end. I
know that feeling.
It's horrible and glorious all at the same time, but then maybe that's the essence of creativity.
Yes.
And oh, thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Oh, thanks, Suzie, and thank you so much for your, going out there and telling me those kind words as well. It really means a lot. So thank you.
It's a great pleasure.
Well, send my love to everyone, and well done on the podcast. I've heard a few episodes, and it's great. You're really asking questions that you don't hear those kind of artists get asked. You're bringing your insightfulness into these conversations, and I think it's really, as a listener, it's really interesting.
Well, I think it's interesting because you do this so unbelievably well. I mean, I know it gives us so much experience to be speaking to other people, and you have that on a regular basis with your radio show. That it's such a privilege that you have to do that, but you do it so well. So actually, it feels a bit strange to me because I know I'm not trying to ask you questions in a different way, but what has to happen every time I speak to anybody is that I have to release any idea that I've got, any plan of anything, and just if I listen, then I'm gonna find some little tiny nugget that I can go back to. But it's hard, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, ultimately, you have a conversation and you ask questions you want to know answers to, and I think that's when it's really successful. And that's definitely what you do with your podcast. So I'll keep listening, and thank you so much.